Welcome to this session in which we will begin a couple of lectures with the aim to understand the term sociological perspective. So, what does this term sociological perspective mean and why is it important? And we are beginning the discussion of a new discipline, sociology, by focusing on the classical social theorists who laid the theoretical foundation of the discipline. So, before entering into these theories, it is important that we have a clear idea regarding what this particular discipline mean. And you can actually approach a discipline, or you can get introduced to a discipline in two ways. One of the ways is to understand the basic concepts of the discipline and the frameworks and then try to understand the discipline, or the other way is to understand the unique perspective of the discipline. What is the unique nature, or what is the unique offering of this particular discipline? And I would be following this second way, in which we will have a very detailed discussion about what is sociological perspective. So, this perspective, the word perspective, is widely understood, or we can explain it as the distinctive viewpoint of a discipline, the exclusive explanatory framework of the subject. So, what does it mean? The distinctive or the distinct viewpoint of the discipline. Every discipline like sociology or political science or economics will have a very unique and distinctive viewpoint, a particular point of view, a particular explanatory paradigm which offers us a unique understanding about the subject matter that we are going to study. And a kind of an explanatory, a kind of an exclusive explanatory framework which is unique to this particular discipline. And this uniqueness is the one which separates sociology from other major social sciences like political science, history, or a discipline like psychology. So, it is extremely important that we get some familiarity with this particular idea, sociological perspective. Now, these are the three major reference materials that we will be using for these lectures, and each of these lectures will revolve around each of these three reference materials. The first one is The Promise from Sociological Imagination by C. Wright Mills, and the second material will be chapter 2 of titled Sociology as a Form of Consciousness from the book Invitation to Sociology by Peter Berger, and the third will be again the introduction titled Sociology What For by Zygmunt Bauman from the book titled Thinking Sociologically. So, these are some of the widely used materials across the globe, and as you must be seeing that these books, especially C. Wright Mills and Peter Berger, they have written their essays much earlier, published in 1959 and 1963, but they are widely considered as the classic books which introduce sociological discipline to the students, and Zygmunt Bauman is more recent. And these are the images of the three books that we will be using throughout this lecture. Peter Berger's Invitation to Sociology, Sociological Imagination by C. Wright Mills, and Thinking Sociologically, Zygmunt Bauman. I would, and these books are available in most of the bookshops or via online, and I would urge you to buy and read these books. We begin with the essay by Peter Berger, Sociology as a Form of Consciousness. And this title itself is very instructive, because he is talking about sociology as a particular kind of a consciousness that you need to acquire, a kind of a consciousness that provides you with certain kind of understanding about the world. And this term, as I mentioned, is something very important, a kind of a sociological consciousness that somebody develops by studying this discipline, and this consciousness offers a particular understanding of the society around one's own life. Now, if somebody asks you what does sociology study, the very common answer is that sociology studies society. And then what is society? Again, you get a set of answers because the term society is widely used. It's a very common word in our everyday life. We have housing societies, you have societies for women, you have societies for certain particular purposes. You have so society is a very common term. But in the discipline, in sociology, these common terms acquire very specific meanings. So similarly, in sociology, this term society acquires a very specific meaning, and it is not used in a very loose manner. So what is the sociological meaning of society, or what is the sociological definition of society? So a sociologist thinks of society as denoting a large complex of human relationships, as referring to a system of interaction. And this is one of the widely used definitions of sociology, though the discipline has been defined by different scholars differently. For example, Emil Durkheim defines sociology as the study of social facts. Max Weber would define sociology as the study of social action. But this is a rather generally accepted definitions, which argues that sociology studies the large complex of human relationships. So we are specifically focusing on the complex set of human relationships that exist among human beings when they interact together, and this term interaction is something important. There is a mutuality, there is a correspondence, it is not a one-sided action. People interact with each other, and that produce a complex web of relationships. This term web of relationship is another widely used term to refer to the subject matter of sociology. So sociology studies this web of relationship which acquire certain patterns, or in other words we call it as forms of social interaction. Now immediate question, how large must be a society? And there is no specific answer, but we can confidently say that an interaction is possible only if there are two or more people. And what is social? What kind of interaction? We are not talking about, or what we have in mind is not the very cursory information or the cursory exchange between two strangers. That does not really constitute an interaction, but rather the social we define to refer to the quality of interaction, interrelationships and mutuality. Especially this term mutuality is something very important. We understand social relationship as the kind of very close relationships as well as not so close relationships which exist among people, either small or large, which have this quality of mutuality, which have this quality of a kind of a particular character, changing character, very thick set of relationships. And these relationships, their specific features, their specific characters and their specific orientations, and these orientations and characters really constitute the subject matter of sociology. And so obviously it is very clear that the sociologist does not look at the phenomenon that nobody else is aware of, and this is again something very, very important. Unlike a psychologist who can claim that a psychological analysis is a kind his or her unique area of investigation. It is not being shared usually by other social scientists. He or she looks into the psychological processes that are happening inside somebody's mind. but sociology will not or cannot make any such kind of claims about exclusivity. Rather, sociologist does not have any field of their own interest which nobody else is aware of. But what is more fascinating, what is more interesting is that a sociologist looks at this same phenomenon that everybody else looks at, but from a different way, from a very unique perspective. So, one of the interesting ways in which Peter Berger defines this sociological consciousness is the ability to look behind or to see through the facade of social structure. And this is a very, very important term, the ability to look behind or the ability to see through the facade of social structure. And he argues that this particular practice of looking at it became possible in Europe after the collapse of Christendom and after the collapse of the absolute state after the Reformation that happened in Christianity. So, what does this particular term mean? The ability to look beyond or the ability to look behind or to see through the facade of social structure. So, this particular argument will become more clear when we proceed further, when we discuss the emergence of sociology and the kind of important theoretical arguments, philosophical viewpoints behind the emergence of this particular discipline. But Berger would argue that sociology offers you a particular ability to understand social structure which shapes our immediate social realities, and the ability to look behind that or to look through that, because this ability to look beyond the facade of social structure, the way in which our society is structured, how the society is structured on the basis of economic relations, on the basis of caste relations, on the basis of gender relations. These structures are extremely important, which provide us with very specific meanings. And sociology offers you an opportunity to look behind or to see through these particular things. And he says that this ability to do that, it became a reality in the Europe, especially in the 18th and 19th century. So, does it mean that the people who lived elsewhere, for example, countries like India or in Arabia or in other part of the world, did not develop this particular ability? Or does this again raise the question whether people who lived in Europe before this 18th and 19th century did not develop these abilities? Of course, they must have, but none of these things become institutionalized. None of these things became institutionalized, and they remained mostly at the individual level. But here we are talking about the emergence of sociology as a discipline which was institutionalized in Europe during this particular time, and that is the importance, that is the important point in which we understand how social context can generate new theories, new frameworks, and even new social sciences. So, for example, he gives quite a lot of examples in his essay. The ability to look beyond the official accounts of certain incidents, the public discourses, the propaganda, the popular assumptions, and so on. So, in this era of saturated media, we are bombarded with quite a lot of information about, we say that we are living in a post-fact or post-truth era. Okay? We are bombarded with quite a lot of information and propaganda. So, the ability to look beyond the official versions, the ability to look beyond the public discourses, the ability to look beyond popular assumptions and popular opinion is something very, very important. And this is important at the level of the discipline, at the level of as the practitioners. It is also important at the individual level, the way in which we understand our own life and the way in which we understand the society around us. How do we process all this information? How do we get a picture with better clarity about the way in which society functions, the way in which we live in the society, we can live in the society, and we are expected to live in this particular society. He gives a very, very interesting example of love marriage, where he says that the common assumption behind love marriage is that people fall in love at the first sight, and there is something that connect them immediately and people fall in love. And he says that there are certain conditions which are necessary mostly for people to fall in love. And if you dissect that, he says that when certain conditions are met or have been constructed, one allows oneself to fall in love. And this is a very, very interesting argument. If you look into how personal preferences actually work between two people who fall in love, how their perceptions about beauty, for example, how their perceptions about family status, for example, about race, example, or about their specific congruence in terms of their ideology, for example. So all these things are extremely important in deciding whether one has to fall in love or not. So the very romanticized idea of two people falling in love because of some forces appears more problematic, because once you analyze that, there are very, very important material conditions and very important calculated moves, calculated decisions behind this act of falling in love. So Berger provides this example which really is instructive for us to understand how even some of the very usual examples like falling in love needs to be analyzed. Then if you extend this argument, for example, functioning of democracy or a particular organization of an industry, how does it work? And democracy, we have a very rosy picture about how democracy is supposed to work. And mostly our politicians will have a very, very, very rosy picture about how their governments uphold the principles and spirit of democracy. But if you dig a bit deeper, if you examine the way in which these systems function, we will realize that many of these promises are problematic, many of the processes are problematic, and democracy is not functioning the way it is ought to function. Or in a particular context, democracy, the practices as well as discourses of democracy assumes specific character by responding to or by navigating with the kind of socio-economic and political processes. So the ability to understand that, the ability to look beyond the arguments of the people who tell you a particular narrative is what is the important contribution of sociology. Similarly, the whole idea about how an industry or an organization functions, and the whole industrial sociology emerged as an area which actually specializes in that, how organization has its own social character, how organization has its own social ethos, which many times contradict the official version of the way in which an organization is run. So as we talked about, this whole idea about whether is this ability uniquely modern. So as we mentioned, this particular way of looking at society was not, or it is not uniquely modern. It existed, but its emergence as a systematic institutionalized discipline, it happened only in these two centuries, 18th and 19th century, in this particular time, Europe. So that is the distinctive character of what we understand it as a European modernity, which gave birth to, or which played a very important role in the emergence of sociology as a discipline. Now he has a very interesting analysis or a distinction between social problem and sociological problem. Now let us spend some time trying to understand that. Most of you must be familiar with this term social problem. So what is a social problem? A social problem is usually considered as something that is not desirable in a society, something that is injurious to society, something that is detrimental to the society. And there is a long list of such so-called social problems, starting with poverty, unemployment, corruption, terrorism, beggary, and a host of such kind of things which are widely considered as unwanted or injurious to the society. So what is the distinction between that social problem and a sociological problem? Now mostly the social problem as something that is as undesirable or injurious or something as negative is mostly defined by the law and or by the state, and there is a very close connection between this law and the state. So, most of the social problems are kind of defined by the popular opinion backed by legal provisions as well as by the state. But sociological problem is different. Of course, there is a sociological problem behind the social problem, but sociological problem, the very term itself is much broader. It is to do with the kind of a disciplinary engagement with a particular situation. As a discipline, it tries to understand a particular situation, and you can develop sociological questions about everything. The sociological problems or sociological questions need not be the situations which are defined as negative or detrimental. And he defines or he argues that the sociological problem is not so much why something goes wrong from the viewpoint of the authorities, but how the whole system works in the first place, in the first place, where and what are its presuppositions and by what means it is held together. For example, imagine a classroom where a teacher is teaching some 40 or 50 students and there is pin drop silence in the class, and this particular class raises quite a lot of interesting sociological questions. So, what is the assumption on the basis this whole exchange, the whole interaction between the students and teachers is going on? What is their understanding of this whole knowledge of learning? How do they understand the role of the teacher? What is the kind of authority that the teacher perceives for himself? What is the kind of power relation between the teacher and the student? What is understood as knowledge? What is understood as the transmission of the knowledge? How does the teacher understand the role of the student in this whole process? Are they merely seen as the mere recipients of the knowledge, or are they seen as the people who are contributing in the generation of the knowledge that must take place in the space of classroom? So, these kind of questions are very, very important. These are not social problems, rather they are sociological problems, because you are asking very, very important questions about a particular social interaction. Similarly, take the example of your own house. What is the kind of arrangement between gender roles in your house? Who does what kind of works? Whether your father helps your mother in cooking, who does the cleaning, who does the cooking? What are the kind of assumptions about it's a man's job, it's a woman's job, and who does what kind of work? What kind of gender stereotypes are prevalent? What kind of changes happened over a period of time? And how do people negotiate these kind of spaces within their own houses? And each of these questions open up very, very fascinating areas of inquiry, which can be broadly understood as sociological problems or sociological questions. So, he gives a very interesting paragraph. The fundamental sociological problem is not crime but the law, not divorce but marriage, not racial discrimination but racially defined stratification, not revolution but government. It is a beautiful statement. You know, this combines a set of social problems as well as sociological problems. But you see that the social problems appear less significant, or social problems appear only as a manifestation or as a side effect of a larger sociological question. Look at the example of, for example, look at the case between the crime and the law. What is the relation between crime and the law? You must be knowing that an act becomes a crime only when the law defines as such. Take the case of murder. A murder is widely seen as a crime, it is punishable under the law, but murder of an enemy soldier is not something punishable, and most often it will be rewarded. So, more than focusing on the crime, it is important for a sociologist to focus on the question of law. How does law gets constituted and how it gets changed? What is the relationship between this official law and the popular perception? And these questions really open up very, very fascinating questions, because some of the acts can become criminalized by the law, And you know that the recent, not so recent judgment about homosexuality being decriminalized. So it was widely considered as a historic judgment which decriminalized a particular act of sexual relationship, thereby liberating thousands or millions of people who till then were branded as criminals. So similarly, the whole question of divorce and marriage. Sociologists are more interested in the changing forms of marriage rather than understanding the changing forms of divorce. If somebody asks this question, why that there were very few divorces some 3 or 4 decades back, and why that the divorce rates are very high now, then the answer comes back to the question of marriage. It's changing character, it's changing composition. The people who enter into the institution of marriage and their aspirations, their independence, their economic stability, their ideologies, their orientations are very, very different from the people who entered into a wedlock some 4 or 5 decades back. So instead of focusing on divorce, it is important that we focus on the institution to which this divorce is only a side effect. And similarly is the case with racial discrimination and racially defined stratification and revolution, and as well as government. So he argues that we would contend then that there is a debunking motive inherent in sociological consciousness. The sociologist will be driven time and again by the very logic of his discipline to debunk social system she is studying. So this term is something very, very important, a debunking motive. And this gets repeated in the writings of Zygmunt Bauman as well. So what does debunking mean? And debunking, so he argues that we would contend then that there is a debunking motive inherent in sociological consciousness. One of the inherent motives of sociological consciousness is to look behind, is to see through things, and to not to accept things at its face value, not to go by the popular narrative, not to go by the immediately visible things, but the ability to look behind, or the ability to see through the kind of narratives that are presented to you. And so that is why this whole argument about debunking becomes important. And the sociologist will be driven time and again by the very logic of his discipline, or her discipline, to debunk the social system that she is studying. So a systematic study of social systems and its structure is something very important for a person to develop her sociological imagination with a debunking intent or with a debunking motive, so that you understand the society in a far better, you understand society in a far clearer manner. So that is the promise of sociological perspective. That is the promise of sociological consciousness. You acquire the kind of a consciousness that allows you to understand, to look at society and make sense of the society in a far better way. So we will conclude this session here, and we will continue with the same topic in the next day as well. Thank you.